Welcome to Nyaya She in Charge campaign. To commemorate International Women's Day, we have dedicated this entire week to our She in Charge campaign to celebrate women in charge and also to help raise awareness about overwhelming issues like domestic violence, sexual harassment at workplace, the glass ceiling, and several other challenges that are unique to being a woman in India. Today, we are talking about She in Charge of Ending Abuse with a very special guest. We have with us today Advocate Mrunalini Deshmukh. Advocate Deshmukh is a prominent family lawyer practicing in the High Court of Bombay. She advocates for gender justice through her practice, and we are so grateful and honored to have her with us today. Welcome, ma'am. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a subject very close to my heart, and no better timing than the International Women's Day, where we are more aware of what are the rights of the women, the duties of the women, the responsibilities of the women, and also what the law provides and the other basic essentials that are required in the event of unfortunate abuse or things like that.
Absolutely. So, ma'am, today we wanted to talk about some of the things that a woman must, or any survivor of violence must keep in mind if she or he wants to step out of an abusive relationship. So, ma'am, can we start with top 10 things a woman must keep in mind if she wants to move out of an abusive home or end an abusive relationship?
So first and foremost, I think you should start with the premise that no woman should suffer abuse. What typically happens is, that people push it under the carpet. Okay, I don't know whether you read it somewhere. There was a survey which was conducted last week, and I think majority of them said that the women need to be obedient towards their husband. Now, I mean, I was rather shocked to see that. Nothing about it. I mean, both should be obedient to each other. Why should only a woman be, the wife be obedient to her husband? Both should respect each other. I hate the word obedient. Obedient is more between a child and a teacher, or a guardian and a child. But both should be. So when we're talking about gender justice and we're talking about gender equality, we're not saying that women are superior to men. Not at all. We are equal to you. And please grant us that those equal rights that are required. So that's point number one. So first and foremost, my suggestion to you would be, let us not suffer any kind of abuse. Us, in the sense, I'm talking representatively for the any women. Okay, giving a chance, trying to work on the relationship, doing all these things is fine, but then there is a limit to which you can do it. Because what happens is, typically in any relationship, the abuser gets emboldened by the fact that the victim is quiet, or the victim is compromising for the sake of the safety of the society, for the children, for all other things which are there. And then instead of making that as a deterrent for him, it serves as a tool to embolden him to continue it further. So that is why, if not at the threshold, at least in its initial stages, I would suggest that the uh, women should show protest. Women should say, this is not done. I'm not going to accept it. You have to stop it. If you don't stop it, I have other measures available in law, which I'm going to do. I'm not saying every woman has to rush to the court or rush to the police station at the drop of the hat. No, we have to be responsible enough. We have to give time. We have to give opportunity. We also have to see one thing, that we are in a family setup. And that family fabric also has to be maintained by everybody. And of course, in this case, when we're talking about the woman also. So that's point number one. Point number two, that the basic thing that she has to say, number one, is not to accept any abuse. Number two, be very careful about keeping a chronology of things that may have happened. Because tomorrow, if you go to a court of law, or tomorrow you do want to go to a lawyer and ask the lawyer to file anything, it's not going to be one instance that will be used in the court or in the police station. It'll have to be a sort of, big, small, some instances together, which will make a composite case for the purposes of domestic violence. That is the other point that we need to keep that in mind. Thirdly, and more importantly, if there are any reports, for example, there is a medical history where there has been abuse, and you have gone to a doctor or you've gone to a local hospital, that's a government hospital, or it's always recommended in a court of law that the examination done by a government or a corporation hospital, for example, in Mumbai, is taken to be as a more authenticated one than a private one. Not that they discard completely, but in these MLC reports, they give weightage to that. So that is to be there. If there is any kind of complaints in the past where you may have dialed 100 101 asking for safety, all those things have to be there. And mostly, and more importantly, before lodging a complaint, you must be completely clear in your mind as to the sequence of the event. So you can make a small noting that, because see, a woman who's traumatized at that in that state is not expected to remember everything. None of us can do that. So as and things happen, there has to be a noting done so that you are a little more aware of it. So before you take a final step, I would suggest that the woman should tell him that, hey, you, A, B, C, D, E. These are the 5 instances in the last 1 year that you have done. I've glossed over it, glossed over it, glossed over it, glossed over it. Now I'm not going to do it. So this is what I'm going to go to the law. That will make the abuser aware that this is something which is being done systematically. This is something where he will get into trouble if it reaches the courts or it reaches the police station. So I think these are the 5, 6 things that you must remember when you intend to go down the route of filing a police complaint or application to that effect.
Ma'am, you mentioned that there needs to be a sequence of events, and the 2005 Act states that domestic violence can be emotional, can be economical, so it need not always be physical. So, when it comes to incidents of, say, emotional violence or any other forms of violence, what would you recommend a woman in distress should do to keep an evidence of it or keep track of such instances of abuse?
Now, as you rightly said, that the Domestic Violence Act is a very well drafted act where it covers to a large extent all the aspects of abuse which are there. Because typically, or normally, if you have someone that that I have been abused, they feel, oh, where did I beat you, or where did I thrash you? I've never done that. But there are other nuances also, which is a mental abuse, is an emotional abuse, there's a financial abuse. So these are the things which you need to understand. Now, as far as the evidences are concerned, for example, when does a typical emotional abuse happen? When you are demeaned, when you are humiliated, when you are run down, when you are spoken in a very filthy language, there is a character assassination. There are sort of embarrassing, disparaging words used against you, and this is not one of the instances. All of us are human beings. We get angry. We do that, but this is something which is as over a period of time becomes a pattern. So there cannot be any evidence as such for an emotional violence, except as I said earlier, that if we do have a noting done of all these things, then probably that's what we can sort of will come to and help to be able to give the precise incidents which are required. Because tomorrow, when the matters go to a court of law, a generalized statement by the woman is not going to help her to prove her case. She has to say in the month of April this happened, last year October this happened, during COVID times this happened, and so then there is a flow of events which then it becomes concrete into a case.
All right, ma'am. So for a woman, when she takes a decision to protest or take a sever this sort of a relationship for the purposes of law, is there anything that she needs to sort of differentiate between abuse or domestic violence, or both can be used
No,
synonymously?
I think these are the two sides of the same coin, if I may use it. So it doesn't matter what your terminology is, it does not matter what it is. What you feel you have to go and tell, it is for the courts and or your lawyer or the cops, if you go to a cop station, to come to a conclusion what kind of abuse does it come under. So she doesn't need to be so educated enough to know whether it's emotional abuse or mental abuse or a financial abuse, because it's not very easy also. Now, what is the financial abuse? The husband doesn't give money to run the house. What does she do? He expects the house to be in order, everything to be taken care of, but he doesn't give. Every time she has to beg and grovel and things like that. or in some extreme cases where the wife in good faith gives her finances to be controlled by the, not controlled, but I would say managed by the husband, then in those cases the husband swindle the amount, switch over the things, liabilities are done. And we are talking about people who are malicious and mean people. So that's a financial violence that is perpetrated on her. She's not allowed to use her own money. Or sometimes, over a period of time, she's always been a homemaker. There's no security created for her. Now, a person who are like you and me are working women, we do have our own independent source of income, big, small, but something or the other is there. But such kind of women who are homemakers and who are wholly dependent and who are also expected to be homemakers. So there are two classes.
Hmm.
One, I have no qualifications, so I am a homemaker, or I don't have any other ability, or my family expects me to be homemaker and to look after the house, which I have accepted it. But then in the long run, where is my security? But tomorrow, if God forbid a situation arises and I'm thrown on the streets, I'm literally on the streets, not metaphorically. So these kind of things have to be taken into considerations by the person who is unfortunately undergoing that.
And ma'am, speaking of financial, abuse, if a woman decides to leave home, should she also keep in mind the list of joint bank accounts she had, and any sort of, is there a provision for
I,
her to question
I,
that?
no, so I think so. I'll tell you one. Number one, a woman should not leave the house unless it's a last resort. And that's your bedroom. I'm talking about a wife or in a shared household. Okay, let's call it a shared
Shared
household
house.
because that also covers. Why should she leave the house if she's subjected to this? The person who's perpetrating that on her should leave the house. A very instinctive way is okay. I can't bear this, and I'm leaving the house. But that makes him great. I can do what I want. So I think you should take leaving the house only after legal advice. Only after where there's really you've reached a stage where you can't, take it further. But first and foremost, you must try and ensure that you are safe in the house with the help of a police or with the help of a court order, which restrains the husband or the partner, as the case may be, to continue to have any kind of a domestic violence, whether it is physical, verbal, emotional, or financial. Worst case scenario, if she does have to leave the house, sometimes in some extreme cases, the courts also order the husband to leave the house if they are of the opinion that it's really unsafe for the woman to stay in the house because of an abuser kind of a man who is living with her. So they may ask him to leave the house also. So I don't think the women should be tempted by the fact that, okay, let me leave the house so I'm there, because that's an immediate reaction. Secondly, suppose, as I said, in the worst case scenario, she does have to leave the house. Then, under such circumstances, what she really needs to take with her is all her personal documents, which is documents like PAN card, Aadhaar, passport, etc., bank statements, bank documents, and most importantly, her jewelry, which, if it is in the house, if it's in the locker, then you have control over it. But and the locker key. If your jewelry is in the locker and if some of the jewelry is say 10-20% is at home, which normally some of us keep, and the heavy jewelry is kept inside, then you have to take the bank locker, the bank document, and your jewelry and whatever cash is available with you because you need that. Okay. So these are the things that you need to take, your basic clothing also. But I can't really tell you what all you should take. This all depends on how it pans out and what is the situation at that point of time. So it's not really proper on my part to make a blanket statement that these are the things, because sometimes it could be a very volatile situation and she may not be sort of in a state of mind or a frame of mind to do these things also. Then what happens? But if it is a well thought out thing, then these are the things that she should keep in mind.
Sure, ma'am. And just for the purposes of our listener, it is not mandatory to leave the matrimonial house even if you filed a divorce, right?
No, no, not at all. Not at all. That is your matrimonial home. You should not leave the house. In fact, we tell the women, don't leave the house. You can stay in the house and still seek reliefs from the court where you are protected from any physical or sort of, aggressive assault or violence, where you are also given a maintenance order or something if he's not paying you and taking care of it. Suppose there are cases where the men don't want to pay for the children, because that's the only way of getting back at a woman. It's not because they don't want to do it. So in such circumstances, the courts come to the relief of such women. So I repeat at the cost of repetition, a woman should leave the house only under absolutely exceptional circumstances where there is no other option for her.
Okay, ma'am. And also for the reliefs that one can get in such situations, ma'am, could you elaborate on the types of reliefs that a woman can
There are
seek?
a lot of reliefs that are given under the domestic violence, the protection of women under the Domestic Violence Act. First and foremost is a protection, as the word itself says. So, which means there is a relief which is given where the respondent, or we can call the abuser for the better understanding of the people, where the abuser is restrained from and prevented from committing any domestic violence on the woman, whether it is physical or whether it is verbal. Okay, that is point number one. The other relief that is given is the order of maintenance. So where a woman is needs money to run the house, where the woman needs money to sustain herself and the family, etc. And if the husband is not giving, so there are monetary reliefs also. Lastly, and more importantly, in some cases, there are child custody reliefs also given to the lady in the event the children are minor, because sometimes the fear and the threat is that the husband may take away the child, or the partner, whoever we may say, take away the child, and the lady will not know what is to be done. Or there are certain things where the lady is sort of the child is not provided for. So even the child's maintenance, school fees, tuition fees. I mean, these sounds like very basic things in the house. But we have cases where even these things are not paid by the men, uh, either deliberately or on advice, as the case may be. So she has protection reliefs. She has monetary reliefs in terms of maintenance for herself and for the kids. She does have custody rights till the decision of custody is arrived at in a proper court. And lastly, there is something, if at the end of the trial, if you are able to prove that there was domestic violence perpetrated on you, then the courts may grant you compensation for the grief and the abuse that you have gone, which is a monetary compensation. But remember one thing, Domestic Violence Act, as is popularly feared or known, is not a criminal act. It's not a criminal. It's not under the criminal provisions, okay, or the criminal act. It is civil by nature, but the option is given of police reports, protection officers reports, and access to all these things. And also, in terms of option, is also given in terms of getting the documents, because sometimes the husbands don't declare their income and they manipulate, fudge their income. So the courts can even order them to get this kind of a stuff. So there may not be an arrest in case of a domestic violence unless it's an independent offense under IPC and India Penal Code under grievous hurt or things like that. But there is relief in terms of the monetary compensation that can be.
This is very helpful, ma'am. Thank you so much. So, in terms of the procedure, what is the difference between a DIR and an FIR, and what should a woman in distress do in terms of approaching the authorities?
So a DIR is a domestic incident report, as they call it. So which means, suppose tomorrow in a particular case there is an abuse that has happened. Okay, then the woman goes to the police and makes a complaint. So which the officer there is a protection officer. And then the protection officer, in his own limited ways, makes a little bit of inquiries, talks to the abuser, if I may use that word, or to the husband, as the case may be, tries to find out what all that. At the end of it, he prepares a report. His report as a domestic incident report, which has to be given, and that report is then kept. And whenever the courts ask for it, it comes to the assistance of the court. So the DIR is to assist the court to understand the extent and the intensity of the domestic incidents or the abuse that has happened to the woman in a particular case. An FIR is like an FIR in all other criminal law. So there is a criminal case which is there. And that's what I said. That Domestic violence and domestic abuse is not only so much physical as in the other nuances which are there. What happens? Okay, I'll give you a very random example. What happens that if a husband creates a fake profile of the wife and puts all nonsensical things on it? You know, I mean, you know what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
Isn't that? I mean, somebody and it's on the public media, etc.
Yep.
That's something which is also violence. That goes to the character, to the dignity and the respect that a woman has, and you're supposed to give that and trying to do this. So this is also a form of an abuse where you don't touch the person, where you don't do anything, but you create this kind of a nonsense or a nuisance to cause harassment to the woman, or to make her buckle under pressure so that she doesn't do any. It could be used in either which ways. So these are the different nuances that comes to it.
So, ma'am, you're saying that the first authority that a woman must go to is the police station, and then the protection officer. Or is there a process flow?
So the police officer himself or herself is a protection officer. So once
Okay.
the complaint is registered and things which are there, then they will they'll come into action, as one would put it.
Right, right. Ma'am, we were just talking about maintenance. I was wondering if I am in a live-in relationship and there is no marriage there, even then, am I entitled to maintenance or relief from the court?
So the Domestic Violence Act for the first time has removed the distinction between a married woman and a woman in a living relationship. So she is given the equal status as far as the maintenance and other reliefs under the DV Act are concerned. So so she can also claim maintenance. She can also claim things like, in basic case in women, house rent if the husband refuses to pay.
Mhm.
In certain cases, the husband has the money but doesn't pay the EMIs for the house, so that the banks can come and take it away. So there are various forms of harassment that can happen to a woman. So even these are the rights available to a lady who is in a live-in relationship. But you have to understand one thing, that the concept of a live-in relationship, and I know this is for the general public, so I'm not getting into it, but those of you who are lawyers, has been defined by the various Supreme Court judgments, that what amounts to a live-in relationship, to be a valid live-in relationship, to be able to get under any relief under the act. But that we can do at some other point of time. But this is what you need to know about a woman in a live-in relationship.
Sure, ma'am. The other question that I had in mind was, so ma'am, the act is dedicated to women. The act itself says protection of women from domestic abuse, domestic violence. What about those people who identify as women and are not women assigned at birth?
Sorry, I didn't get your question. What do you mean?
Ma'am, what about women, trans women and women who identify? Yeah. So do they?
So there is no definite definitions which are given in the act, because please understand, this is an act of 2005. Today all these things that have come up, and rightly so, for the protection of the transgenders and things like that, is in the recent 2 3 years. But I would suggest that it could apply even to such kind of women who are in that relationship. In fact, interestingly, I must tell you, it's a little different aspect of it and maybe not so relevant for the Women's Day. But the fact is that there is a lot of hue and cry by the husbands that why it cannot be a gender neutral law.
Right.
Why does Domestic Violence Act have to be only for the protection of women? There are certain cases where men are also at the receiving end in a similar manner. But that's a different discussion that we are having. But there is no specific definition in the law for such genders as we have just spoken, like
Okay.
transgender and things.
Okay, ma'am.
The law will evolve finally, please. I mean,
Yes.
as it things, the law evolved. When we're talking about the enactment, which is of 2005, so obviously,
We all rest our hope on that.
absolutely.
Ma'am, also, when it comes to custody of children, we were talking about custody being one of the reliefs that a woman is entitled to from the court. Is there usually an assumption of guardianship of mothers in any situation of divorce or domestic violence?
So there is no presumption, but under the Hindu Minority Guardianship Act, the law says that usually to the age of 5 or 6, the child has to be with the mother. Obviously, sometimes she's a nursing mother. Sometimes the mother is able, the lady is able to personally and be a hands-on person. But in all guardianship and custody petitions, the law says that it is the best interest and welfare of the child that the courts will have to decide, taking all the facts and circumstances into consideration, rather than the right of a parent or B parent.
Right, right. We have had such an enlightening conversation over the past few, minutes. We're nearing. I'm nearing the end of the list of the questions I have. Just with your permission, ma'am, wanted to ask a final two questions. One thing is we often come across cases of women who have married, Indian citizens. They've married each other according to foreign laws and in a country outside of India. But if there is an incident of abuse is taking place in India while probably they were visiting or on holiday, such cases have been on the rise during the lockdown in the past few years. So, what laws would be applicable to them?
I think if the cause of action, as we call it in law, has happened in the jurisdiction of the particular, say it's Bombay or Delhi or whatever it is, and irrespective of the nationality or irrespective of the fact whether they are residents or not, the, the primary objective of the act and the enactment is to protect the women. And then comes all those things, whether you're an Indian, you're a foreigner, you are married here, not married here. So protection of the women is the primary concern.
Right, right. And also, if once the entire trial is over and the case has been resolved per se, even if a decree of divorce has been granted, is it necessary for a woman to change her surname, official name? If yes, how can she do that?
Please understand one thing: change of name is not in law. There is no legal provision that you have to change your name and take your husband's name after marriage. It's a custom that we follow. It's a tradition that we follow. My mother changed her name. My mother's mother changed her name. So I changed it because I changed. My daughter changes her name. Okay. So there is no law which says that. Even after marriage, you can retain your maiden name, as you know, in most of the cases, people do. There are certain cases where women keep their name as Miss or whatever, the name is X, and the parents' last name and the husband's last name, where they take both the last name. So change of name is not something that needs to be done, but there is a process of going to the gazette. So just because you're divorced, it doesn't mean even during your marriage you can change your name. Once you are an adult, you have a right to change your name and come back to the original name that you want to get into it. So there is no reason for you why you should do it. You could do it even otherwise. But the process is that you have to go to the government gazette and make an application. Sorry, fill in the application as per their requirements, give them the necessary documents, etc. And once it comes out in the gazette, then you can officially use that name for the purposes of your passport, Aadhaar, or whatever it is.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This has been extremely informative and extremely useful. My last request to you is, since our campaign is called She in Charge and we are celebrating women like yourself who are in charge, if you could have a message for women who are right now not feeling so much in charge, or maybe at in a situation of vulnerability, what would your message be?
So at the outset, I would like to say, and this is not because I'm a woman, but at the outset, I would like to say that the woman or the child or the female, by birth, by constitution, biologically, is very resilient, very strong, and a fighter. Okay. Now, this is something that we have seen. Some are able to tap this potential in them and sort of move ahead and get things done. Some of them are cowed down because they lack belief in themselves, or there are circumstances that are around them that they really sort of mar it down. So my only thing is that it is extremely important for a woman to take charge. As you read, your campaign is she in charge. It's so important because unless you are in charge of your own self, you believe in your own self, in your own potential. One doesn't have to be a highly qualified or a rich lady or a very resourceful person. Even a person who is doing domestic work in your house, You can see some of them are so strong. They take charge of themselves. They do not let any kind of things. They are not vulnerable. They are willing to fight because it all starts here. It's not, once you believe in yourself and once you know that you're not going to take nonsense, then it just flows from a woman's sort of, whether the way kind of she wants to resent in terms of words, in terms of complaints, in terms of going to courts, or in terms of involving community and family members to get this resolved. So that is one thing that I would like to say. Secondly, it's very important on this International Women's Day, which I would want to share with on your platform, is I think every woman should, to the best of her ability, try and be financially independent in any big, small, whatever way you are. Even if you're a domestic worker, you're doing this, be financially independent. Because once you have financial independence, that gives you a sense of confidence. And that gives you a sense of being less dependent on anybody. And then that will give you more clarity in your mind. So believe in yourself, be convinced about it that we are by birth, God has made us the way we are. Thirdly, after being this, we also have a duty as women to be very responsible, like both men and the women, all the more women, because we need to look after, in a way, after the family structure. Let not all these laws and all these enactments which are there be frivolously used by some women or some section of the women and abuse the provisions of the law for either greed or for any larger gain. Let the law be put set in motion for the genuine cases, for women who need all these things, so that tomorrow there is no question. Because nowadays you hear, oh, this law is being abused by the woman. Why have this enactment that is being abused by the women? Abuse, some women who abuse a law does not mean you cannot have a law. A law needs to be in place. So that is where I said a sense of responsibility has to be there. That we don't be frivolous, we don't be vindictive, and we don't misuse the law, because then the law will lose its flavor and the essence.
That is such an important message and a wonderful note to end this really, really insightful interview on. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time. We're so grateful, and we hope to continue simplifying and explaining laws for our audience. That is what we do at Nyaya, and also make the information actionable so anyone and everyone can take charge of their own lives. Thank you so much, ma'am, for empowering us with the tools to do so.
Thank you for inviting me. And you guys are doing a wonderful, wonderful job. There's nothing like imparting knowledge and awareness in any section of the society. And I think what you're contributing to the society through your platform is an enormous contribution towards legal and other kind of literacy between the people, amongst the women and the other people, to bring about an awareness and to make it a little more knowledgeable. You're doing a great job. Please continue it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.